Swear. Yo.
All right, so today we're joined by Ryan Schmidt, a true powerhouse in the music and entertainment industry. Ryan is not only a talented singer and songwriter turned entertainment lawyer, but he is also a passionate advocate for artists and creators. With firsthand experience as a touring musician, Ryan understands the challenges artists face and has dedicated his legal career to protecting them from unfair deals and helping them navigate the complexities of the music business. From representing high-profile clients and landmark cases to helping independent artists secure their rights, Ryan is here to share his invaluable insights and advice. Let's dive in. Hey, I'm sorry, Ryan. I had to go ahead and write that out because you're so professional and you've just been all over. I wanted to make sure to capture the full, background of everything you sent me earlier. So what's up, man? Thanks for joining me.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me here, Josh.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, we linked up, I think, how most people are linking up in the music industry right now, which is getting in each other's DMs and trying to figure out, hey, man, let's just chat and see if we can spread some knowledge to people and figure out what's going on, right? So how did you get into this on the social media side and what you're doing? Like, can you give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, so I've been a music lawyer for the last 7 years. That's when I graduated law school and went headfirst into it because that's always been something that I wanted to do. My music background, being an artist, being a singer-songwriter. But what I found in starting my own music law practice was that the entertainment legal industry is very small. It's very close-knit, but it's run mostly by these massive firms that have 1,000+ attorneys, and they happen to practice every single type of law. They do like employment law and construction law, and they have an entertainment law division, which might be a handful of attorneys. But because they've been around so long and they are so well established, they're the ones that are the first of mind when it comes to like, Beyonce or Lady Gaga or somebody needs a lawyer. They're like, oh, call, Manat or Loeb and Loeb. Right. And I knew that I couldn't compete playing that game. Right. I don't have 1,000 attorneys under my stable. Right. So I really wanted to differentiate myself. There's a lot of lawyers that are scared of social media because of all these different ethical rules, and you're not my client, so I don't want to, make you think that this is legal advice and this is the other thing. I kind of took a different approach that this is so needed. And if we can eliminate barriers to talking with legal professionals and just getting the advice that people need, and that'll differentiate me, and people will come to know me, trust me, and eventually grow my business. And it has been very, very successful.
That's awesome, man. That's great. And that's really kind of the craziness behind it is, as we see over the last 20 years, the industry has taken this massive corporate approach to creativity and music. And it's now kind of like, I think at the end, the strains are just too much and it's too big. And now we're looking for those experienced niche professionals who can give us insight for little to no money, but are at the same time invaluable in what you guys have, really.
Yeah, it's a real tipping point, and I'm happy to see it because I think people are pretty fed up with kind of the old guard just gatekeeping as much information as possible.
Oh, yeah. And outside of that, I kind of run into this issue, and I wonder if you do too, is as a small independent label trying to help new emerging artists, seeking legal advice is one of the scariest things because one, it's expensive, and two, you're trying to find somebody who, well, they kind of understand what you're doing in the music industry. They understand social media, the creativity, like the usage rights of like different things. So it's like, it really seems chaotic. How has social media really affected the legal and entertainment industry right now?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that social media limits the barrier to entry for a lot of folks. It's a positive and it's a negative, because I think it's positive that folks like me can get out there and have more of a national presence and can compete with some of the bigger firms on pretty much a zero marketing spend budget, because you just show up, you put an iPhone in front of your face, and you say what you know, and that if that connects with people, then that's free marketing.
Right.
What I think is not so great about it is that since there is no barrier to entry, a bunch of people try to do it. And sometimes there's misinformation that's spread. There's people online that are more, I would say marketing companies or coaches or something like that.
Right.
But they do sometimes delve into more legal type advice. And sometimes they get it dead wrong. And I just kind of scratch my head and say, you might be the best Spotify playlist marketer that ever existed, but like, please don't tell people like how to trademark.
That's a big piece of it, is everyone trying to hook people with these 3 things you need to do for music, or these. And when I listen to you and other legal representatives, it's straight from the black and white, and you can tell right off of the bat. So, how do we combat C lawyers, I guess is what we would call it back in the day, but like those lawyers who are out there, or people giving out false legal advice, or just something to get you to click. How can a new artist really combat that and finding the true information they need?
Well, I think first you gotta trust your gut. There's attorneys out there, some attorneys out there that say they're entertainment lawyers that aren't actually entertainment lawyers. They might have, reviewed a DJ contract for their nephew's bar mitzvah once, and they're like, I'm an entertainment lawyer because I've reviewed this one quasi entertainment contract. So the first thing is to check their resources, check what they're saying, and if they seem knowledgeable on this industry, which is pretty complicated, that's the first thing. You shouldn't have a sense that your lawyer doesn't know as much about the music business as you do. You should talk to them like, man, there's a lot that I didn't even know I don't know about.
Right.
So that's a first one. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is just like, look at, this is such a relationship that has to be built on trust and respect, and find somebody that you connect with and that you like. I kind of bear it all out there. Like, who you see on Instagram is who you get when you book a consultation with me, and who you get when you talk to me on the phone. I try to be as like, this is just me, and like you can hate it or love it, but there is always a risk that somebody clicks record and they are putting on some other type of persona, and you call them on the phone and they're like a giant asshole. So like, you got to keep that in mind too.
Right, exactly. And that's a great point. So, okay, all right, everybody's saying we're now in an independent age of music, or like we're getting into the independent industry. And so we're starting to see big companies, or big like UMG, Sony, all of them are starting to look more towards these distribution deals. Okay. And I know that you've probably answered this question or something like it a million times. What does this really mean? Okay, so you have distribution deals where, like, you have major artists like Megan Thee Stallion saying, hey, look, I want a distribution deal and I want to own my masters. And now this is like, it was groundbreaking, but it's something that independent artists have been doing for a really long time. So where is this going as far as independent artists versus the mainstream entertainment, and how we're seeing the legal, how does it to entertainment law? How is that really affected?
Well, the rise in good, affordable recording software and easy direct consumer distribution has really democratized the music industry.
Right.
We saw last year that 50% plus of those nominated for the Grammy Awards were independent artists.
Wow.
The independent music, global impact of independent music, they are just crushing it as far as money goes, because they are keeping a lion's share of their money and they're not relying on the old business model.
Right.
What that looks like from a major label standpoint is the major labels used to shell out a ton of cash and to attract artists, and then in exchange for that cash, they essentially buy the masters. That was a kind of a fair exchange, because you were getting these big advances and they were going to keep essentially the copyrights to the sound recordings for forever.
Right.
And more independent artists have been able to find success because of the things I mentioned. It's easy to record, it's easy to distribute, they can find an audience online, they can create content. And so they realized, I can do all this without having to give up my copyright ownership and the lion's share of the profits to a label. So then what started developing from that is there was independent labels and distributors that offered more of these licensing type deals or distribution deals, which had much more favorable terms. This might, instead of being the old label deal was essentially like an 80-20 in the label's favor, plus a whole bunch of debt. The new like label model or licensing model starts at 50-50, but I've seen it go all the way up to 70-30 in the artist's favor. Right. So it can be very beneficial, but then the artist maintains the copyrights to their masters. They just license it to that distributor or that label for a set period of years, usually 10 to 15 years.
So do you still see an importance in, so it's important, I think, always for artists to own their creative rights to their music, right? It gives them the most amount of leverage. In our opinion, is how I kind of break it down to our artists. But what do you really think is probably like, how important is it for them to own their masters in today's music industry?
It can be very important. The only time I'd say you can certainly sell your masters as long as you're getting some life-changing money. You know, you can, somebody's offering you millions of dollars and, you know, that makes sense to you, go ahead and sell those masters. But for the most part, if you are able to create a revenue stream for you with your independently released music that, you know, month after month, it's making X, even in a hypothetical distribution or licensing deal, after that 5-10 year period, you're going to get back 100% of that revenue stream and 100% of those copyrights. So you could sell that to somebody that does straight up catalog buyouts. You could finance that to pay for your next record. You could enter a new licensing agreement. There's a lot more you can do, where a traditional label is just a one and done. Once you sign that deal, that's it for that music.
Well, what should you do then, and what should you look out for if you are trying to do some type of contracts that do have your masters in it? Like, what should new artists look for? Because I've had multiple artists sitting down looking at $1 million deals and just are terrified, you know, at this point. And I've had artists lose out on $1 million deals because the labels they were with were going for distribution deals instead of single. And so, like, there's a lot of confusion, but what should an artist really look for whenever they're looking to sign a contract where their masters are involved?
When what a label will do is they'll kind of hide the ball a little bit on whether or not masters are owned by them or by the artist. I've never seen a artist label recording agreement that says label owns the masters. Instead, what it says is that artist agrees that label shall, any works created in the masters shall be a work made for hire for the label. Those words, work made for hire, equals master ownership to the label. You are saying that you don't own any copyrights to the sound recordings because these are being paid for and commissioned by the label, and that they will own it. So look for the word work for hire, and see what that covers, because that can cover just the masters, but sometimes that can also cover the underlying compositions you're publishing.
And what I tell artists is, you know, if you're going to sit down with somebody who's taking the time to put an actual contract with all that together, find you someone to sit down with you and make sure they have a legal background and should be a certified attorney if possible. But how do you say, or what are one of the like first mistakes you see artists ever really getting into whenever they're going to sign that first deal or do something with a label?
Well, first it would be that they are negotiating it and signing it without anybody reviewing it and without any backups. I mean, definitely don't sign any long-term agreements without understanding what it says and without having that reviewed and negotiated by a licensed qualified entertainment attorney.
Right.
There will be a clause in there in most agreements that says that you have the opportunity to review this with independent counsel. So that means that even if you didn't hire a lawyer, you're going to be prevented in the future from saying, well, I didn't really know what I signed and I want to get out of this because I just didn't understand it. They'll say, we gave you every opportunity to do that, and we actually encouraged you to do that, and you just chose not to do that.
Yeah, kind of a CYA on the back end of a contract for the label. So something that I saw earlier yesterday, and we talk about it a lot because I try to keep artists focused on it. But what do you do in like telling the difference between a copyright and a trademark for an artist, and why do both matter, and why are they important and different in their own aspects? That's something I think we have a lot of conversations about.
Yeah. So a copyright is a limited monopoly in your creative work. This is your song, your lyrics, your artwork, photography, videography, whatever. And the Copyright Act says that from the second you put that work in any tangible means of expression, like I write it down on a piece of paper, I write down lyrics, or I pull out my iPhone voice memos and I record an idea, I now own that copyright because I have now created it and I have put it in some tangible form.
Okay.
And you will have that as the owner. And this is all US copyright law, but you will have that for your entire life plus 70 years after you die. So it can be a long protection that's automatic. You get certain benefits by federally registering that with the US Copyright Office that you wouldn't have just from those automatic rights. If you federally register, then you have the right to sue for copyright infringement. You can't even get in the door for a copyright infringement case unless you federally registered. You have the right to collect statutory damages. That's where you see that big range of, $150,000 because somebody intentionally stole this song.
Oh, wow.
You also have the right to get your attorney's fees covered. That's not something that you usually get in the American legal system. It's usually everybody pays for their own, win, lose, or draw. So those are big, very important protections, and copyright, protects your creative expression.
If you do the federal copyright through the government, which what you were describing earlier before that was just a natural copyright, right? Like what you get upon the creation of the work, basically.
Correct. Yeah, you get the natural copyright, and that has plenty of great protections, but you won't be able to sue for it. If you register it after somebody steals your song, your rights and remedies might be limited. And it gives you, registering it with the federal copyright also gives you a presumption of ownership.
Okay.
So if it's not enough to have just put it online on your distributor or have some metadata that says that this file was created on this date or the other. I mean, that's all good evidence. But the best evidence is you actually federally registering that with the Copyright Office, because you're registering this under penalty of perjury.
Right.
There's some real protections there that you are telling the truth, and because of that, you are presumed to be the legal owner, which means if somebody were to steal your work and you file a lawsuit, that lawsuit starts with the assumption that you own this, right? And they would have to put on evidence to rebut that presumption that you don't own it. And that's a good starting place. So highly recommend doing it. It's not terribly expensive. The filing fees are between $65 and $85. You can generally find out how to file those through YouTube, unless you have some very specific and complex situation with different owners and what you're using.
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming if it's your first time doing it, but you can definitely, I mean, come on, I taught myself, and another great attorney, go and get your book, Everything There Is to Know About the Music Industry Business. And like, that's a great book. And it tells you a lot of the breakdowns on how to do that. And I think it should be the first thing every musician should probably grab. So copyright and trademarking more is your artist name, your brand, things like that, right? And how important is it to have those things ready before you even walk into that room to talk to a label?
So a trademark protects the consumers to identify the source of goods or services. So if you have a trademark or a trade name, the public has come to associate that name with you and your goods and services.
Wow.
So that's also very powerful. If you have a federal trademark, now nobody else in the country in the same services industry, and in music, we're talking maybe recorded music, live touring, merchandise, nobody else can use that same name because you have laid claim to it. But you only get those rights if you're actually using that name in interstate commerce. And by that, I mean, you're putting it up online, you're selling it, you're touring. You can't just hoard, names and file trademarks and say, like, maybe here's 10 different band names that I might want to use in the future, so let me just register them all and kind of sit on them. You actually have to show that you are using these names because you get the protections through the actual use of that name.
Wow. Okay. So that isn't like just going and buying a domain name because you think you might want those 10 names for your domain name. You just
correct. And that's totally fine. If you want to do a domain, you want to like maybe sit on some social handle. But as far as getting the trademark protection, it's got to be one that you have landed on, you've decided. And the trademark filing fees in the process can be a lot more expensive and unforgiving. So make sure that that's what you want to do. Like at minimum, if you file with an attorney, the trademark application was $250, you just moved it up to $350, but they charge even more if you don't file with an attorney because they imagine there's going to be issues and the trademark office is going to have to come back to you and get more information and this, that, the other thing. But it'll take about a year from when you file the trademark application to when it's finally approved. So if it's something you want to do, don't sit around and say that's something I'll get to eventually, because there's a big, long process. First, it has to be reviewed initially to make sure the application even looks good and has everything it needs. Then it needs to be published. And that is really the trademark office letting everybody else, the world, know that Josh is asking to register this trademark. Does anybody else have an issue with that? Are they using them? And if anybody comes forward and says, actually, I've been using this name for the last 20 years, that could kill it right then and there. But assuming you make it past that, you go through a few more steps and it finally gets approved within a year. But another hugely beneficial thing to do if you are serious about protecting your name. As far as what do you need to do before walking into a deal, the copyrights and the trademarks aren't going to prevent you from necessarily getting a deal, but making sure that, at least for the copyrights, making sure that you have a clear paper trail with all your collaborators could very prevent you from getting a deal. If you don't have, say you have samples and you haven't cleared those, or you have a producer and you don't have a producer agreement and you haven't agreed on publishing splits and royalties and that sort of thing, that can really make it a lot more messy in a paperwork setting to get that record deal finalized.
And see, that's a great, so that's a segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about. And so that when it comes to working with other creators, especially in this independent, industry that we're working in, or the creator economy, you got a lot of people hitting people up in their DMs and they're doing features and they're grabbing beats from people, right? So I always talk about paperwork, or at least the importance of agreements that you can then stand upon later and protect yourself, and someone can protect themselves. But how can artists protect themselves from unfair splits and hidden clauses and stuff like that when they are collaborating with other creators?
I think the first key is just starting from a place of good, solid communication. A lot of folks think that talking about the business and splits is going to kill the vibe in the room, in the studio, and ruin the opportunity. There's certainly a way to do it. Don't come out the bat and say, how much money is this going to be? What's my percentage? Whatever. But make sure that you have that conversation in the beginning or right when the song is wrapping up, before everybody leaves the studio, so we know what that's going to look like, and at minimum confirm that understanding in an email, but preferably have some type of split sheet, work for hire agreement, something that's all tidy.
Right. That's fair. Okay. And with the industry being taken over by streaming, you got Spotify and all these other things. How are artists really going to be able to ensure that they're getting all the revenue that they're owed? And we talk about, how to register all your music and do things. If you're working with partners, especially, you talked about splits. There's some distribution channels that will let you pay out splits. So really, do you think that how should artists be ensuring that their money is handled right and they're getting everything they're owed?
I think it's got to start with good communication. You have contracts, but then depending on the distributor and the different platforms, there is also an element of following up and trust. The distribution companies that are allowing for splits to be added, I think that's really great and really beneficial. I have seen that some of those. What I like about it is that it ensures that somebody's getting paid their split, and whoever owns that distribution account doesn't have to even think about it. Doesn't have to do the math. It's just automatically sent out. What I don't like about it is just how easy it is to change those.
Right.
So I could agree that, somebody could agree to pay me 10% of this thing, and they could add me into DistroKid. But then we get in the fight, and next month they delete me from DistroKid. Mm-hmm. We already have that agreement, but they own the account, and there isn't really anything I could do. I would really love for there to be some type of situation where that stays in place until like both sides send some type of notice to cancel it.
Mm-hmm. That would be great. And I see a lot more of that happening because I think, the industry is moving quicker than honestly that a lot of the foundation, the back end, the infrastructure is able to support. But things like that and problems like that are exposing themselves. And so I think that that's a really good point, because I've noticed that myself is like, well, what keeps anyone from going into, even AWOL or any of those have the same split sheets, and you could easily go in there and just change those without anybody's approval and so I think that's and another reason why artists need to own the control of what they're doing too, and understand those platforms. And don't just, too many artists, I think, are willing to just give over to somebody they feel have more information or feel more confident in them. Where really, if we would just stop being lazy and take 30 minutes or 5 minutes to watch a YouTube video, you'd learn on your own. But I mean, there is that convenience of it, right? But that's what you pay for if you just always rely on convenience.
For sure. And also, if you've got, so that's going to be on the master side, but if you got any type of publishing, make sure that those songs are registered with BMI and ASCAP. Mm-hmm. These are public repertoire searches that you have access to. It's a quick Google search to go into BMI repertoire search, look up the name, look up your writer name, and make sure that they registered it and they registered it properly. Because if your name isn't on there, but you have a split sheet, reach back out to them and say, hey, we need to update this.
Yeah, because you're losing out on rights, but also money at the end of the day. And so what do you think is the biggest thing that artists don't realize about publishing rights?
That publishing exists. Great point. a lot of artists I deal with, they think that their distributor is the end all be all. And once they put that music up there and they're getting paid, that's it, and that's all they need to do. And I can kind of understand some of that confusion, because some distributors have partnered up with publishing administrative partners, so they can actually collect some of that as well. So depending on your situation, you might be all good, but for example, DistroKid doesn't have a publishing administrative partner, and so I say, what are your royalties? You're collecting the royalties, and say, absolutely, I got DistroKid. Like, no, you need, BMI, you need the MLC, you need sound exchange, you need all the other things. And really, that just comes down to, like, conceptually, it makes sense that, like, you've got one song, right? You got a mix and mastered wave file. It makes sense that that's one copyright,
right?
But that's two copyrights. That's your sound recording copyright and composition, your music and lyrics and publishing. So that's really like one of the biggest challenges, is you just let people know that those are two different things.
Right. And that's the thing too, is I tell a lot of artists, because so what do you see as far as on the production and beats? And this is something I've had a conversation with is, okay, we have all these beats and a lot of artists are hitting YouTube like crazy and they're pulling beats off and they're, oh, when I make money, I'll buy the beat or this and that. And I think it's really dangerous in how we go about that, because at any point in time, the producer of that beat can just call back. But I tell artists too that, like, once you put your lyrics to a song, or to a beat, you formed a song, which is now a new copyright in and of itself, and you got to understand that. And it brings a whole lot of other, legal challenge to it. So can you kind of explain that a little bit, and how, the beat's owned by one person and the music and the song owned by another one, and the mixing done one other person? How does that affect you as an artist, and what you're either getting or missing out on?
Yeah, so the Copyright Act says that anytime two or more people come together and create a work, and they make a complete song, when whatever that means, but they intend for that final version to be the final version, then they are deemed to be co-owners equally of that work. So if I'm working with a producer, they send me a beat and I record vocals and write lyrics to it, we are now the co-owners of that work. We might co-own the master. We might definitely co-own the composition, because we both contributed to the music and lyrics of it. But that is a situation where we're in agreement that we have, we both wanted to work together. We both intended to create this work together. Where you have a producer that makes beats, that work is already a complete copyright. It's already a work. There's already a copyright to the sound recording. It's just an instrumental, but it's a complete musical work. And you already have the composition, because they've already created the music to it. So when you have somebody that might use that as a base to add things on top of it, if they didn't get the permission from the producer, say they took it off of YouTube, and YouTube will generally say, nonprofit, go ahead and use it. But if you're going to do it for profit, including putting on streaming, putting up for downloads, you need to buy a license.
Right.
If you don't buy a license, you have infringed on that copyright.
Mm.
You actually don't have any ownership. Even what you added is kind of up in the air, because there was a pre-existing copyright that you didn't have permission to add to. That would have had to be a derivative work of the original instrumental.
Right.
And so getting that license or that agreement with the producer is what gives you permission to add on to it. But if you just create it and you just say, well, this is my song now because, I added the vocals and I remixed it or whatever, it's not true. Like, you are in a real dangerous place of potentially getting sued for copyright infringement.
And you don't even need to be in that place. That's the situation I try to tell artists is, yeah, we have platforms like BeatStars that make it really easy for you to go in and buy it, but you could just hit up your friend or your homie on Instagram and say, hey man, I'll give you 20-30 bucks and you give me an exclusive license to this. And honestly, a lot of them are going to say, cool, and if not, you at least are getting the security to know you own it, instead of like after, what do they say sometimes, like 10,000 streams or 100,000 streams, now you got to come back and get an exclusive license and you're paying more.
10 years later, it's anything like that.
Right. Exactly. So it kind of goes into my next point is, where do you see as far as, licensing it for movies and sync licensing? That's moving super fast. And I think it's a great way for artists to make money really quick, especially with indie movie makers or people making shows for Tubi and other things. Like, how do you see that as far as, obviously with entertainment law, but moving in the future for artists, seeing as you are an artist as well yourself?
I think it's been around for a long time, and it's always been more or less a great revenue source for songwriters and artists. I think it's getting a lot more attention now because the money in recorded music and in publishing has really diminished because of streaming. So now this is one of the areas where you get paid really well for a feature. You know, these production companies are going to pay a flat fee, and there's potential back in royalties, and that can do a lot better. You know, you can get one placement for some indie film and get $10,000,
Right.
or you can stream how many millions to get. You can stream 2.5 million times to get $10,000. So like, which one's easier? You know, like, and I think that from a time value money standpoint makes a lot of sense. But then it can also open a lot of doors. How many times have you been in the theaters and watching a movie, and then the song comes on? That's awesome song, and I've never even heard of this band. Wow, that's let me pull up Shazam and let me find this band. You know, people discover music like that all the time. So I think there's going to be a lot more people focusing on sync, and I've certainly seen on social media there's a lot more accounts where people focus and giving advice and resources to the music sync community. One thing that I'll say there is it's even more important to have all of your splits and copyrights and everything buttoned up in the sync world.
Right. Absolutely.
A label might not look or bat an eye in the fact that you've got some uncleared samples, or you don't have all your split sheets together or whatever. All they care about is that they have the rights to release the master, and then the publishing, you know, maybe they'll figure that out on the back end. But with Sync World, you need to be able to clear both the publishing and the master very quickly, because a lot of times, especially like in TV, they might post a brief and then that episode is going to air within a week, and they need to sign those contracts and get everybody cleared. And if you bought a beat off of YouTube and this guy is in Russia who made the beat, and you've never actually talked to him, and you're reaching out to him and saying, hey, can you sign this agreement? And he just never checks his DMs, you lost that feature. You know, even if that show is red hot on you being the song in the opening of their episode, they're going to move on because you can't give them the rights that they need.
Right.
So get those split sheets and get some type of agreement that says that you have the rights to negotiate on behalf of all the writers as like a one-stop, that you can clear 100% of the publishing for that exact reason, that they don't have to go and track down 5 different people. And then when you get paid, then you can pay your collaborators their percentage. But it's not going to be the roadblock that prevents you from getting that sync opportunity.
Right. Well, that's smart. That's a huge piece. And like I said, with the breakout of Tubi and all these new production studios standing up, and like you said, just the barrier of entry being reduced for getting into music and movies and entertainment in general with technology, I think we're going to see a lot more sync licensing. And I think it's super important for the artists to understand the legalities behind that and how important ownership. And I didn't even think about, like, that's a great point. Timelines. Like, I've done a couple commercials and stuff on the production side, and they're fast, and it has to get out fast. So that's a great point. So I did bring it up, and we talked about it before we started recording, but you are an artist yourself, and you have produced music, and you have sang, and you toured. And so where can people find you? And then, as a former musician, and now you're a lawyer, like, what is the one lesson you think that resonates, in your music career and your legal work?
So as far as my artist music, it's my name, Ryan Schmidt, singer-songwriter, mostly pop, indie rock type stuff. You can find that anywhere you listen to streaming music. I just finally started putting music back up online because when I went to law school, I got in my head that no law firm was going to want to hire me because I was some kid that used to have like a mohawk and try to do the artist thing. And so I scrubbed a lot of that offline. But, if you're into Death Cab for Cutie, some good indie rock, The Shins, and then some of the later stuff after I did more, TV type reality show, I went a little bit more pop. And that's probably more along the lines of like Maroon 5, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's all on Spotify. You can listen to that there. The lessons that I take away from my music and artist career to now in the legal practice, one is how I felt as an artist trying to reach out to lawyers. You know, that's something that I try to make as easy as possible. There were times, you know, there was one day that I released this EP in 2014. It was this EP called Love Lust, and it's not on Spotify right now. I'm gonna remastering, and put them up as singles. But
Nice.
when it went up in 2014, it was on the front page of iTunes. It's like their version of, like, you know, new release Friday, right? It was on the front page, and it was like me and like Ed Sheeran and Sam Smith. So I was like the only independent artist that was on that front page. And that was partially because I had some good traction in pre-sales, and partially because my distributor at the time, TuneCore, had really pitched the hell out of it, which was awesome. So that couple days when it was on the front page, I was getting a lot of outreach from industry folks. It was like, who is this independent artist, and why is he on this with Ed Sheeran and Sam Smith? And I didn't have any type of lawyer in my corner. And I wanted to make sure that if and when a contract came my way, that I could have somebody ready to call and help me with that. And so I reached out to a handful of lawyers, all the big firms that you know, have 1,000+ attorneys that work with Beyonce and Lady Gaga, stuff like that. And I didn't hear back from a single one of them. It was, I'd call the front desk. Hey, I'd love to talk to so-and-so. What's your name? Let me take a number. Let me take a message. Didn't hear back from them. They'll give you a call back. No. And then I'd call other attorneys, and nobody would get back to me, which was wild, because attorneys are in the business of helping people and working to make money. So you'd think I had money and I had to work for them, but they just wouldn't call me back.
Right.
And so I couldn't believe how difficult it was to get a hold of folks. And so what I've done as a lawyer is I've tried to make it as easy as possible. There's certain things and services that are limited to a few artists on my roster. You know, like if it's a career artist that's on a label that's doing a bunch of things, that's somebody who is, you know, I will put my neck out for, and I will introduce and get meetings for. You know, I'm not just going to do that for every person that enters my DMs. But what I do is I have in my Instagram account, I have a link to my calendar. So if anybody ever wants to jump on my calendar and talk about any legal question they have, or make sure that all their publishing is set up right or whatever, you can book a half hour of my time, you know, and usually you can book it within 24, 48 hours. Whereas before, I'm thinking about, I'm just sitting around waiting for somebody to give me a call back. You know, I want people to have pretty easy access to me. So that's something that I've kind of taken away. And the other thing is just like, it's really helped empathize with clients, because I've been there as an artist. I've signed some horrible deals. I know what it's like to kind of feel scared about the fact that you're excited about an opportunity, but you're not really sure whether or not this is going to be a good opportunity, or there's going to be something that somebody takes advantage of you.
Right. That's a great point. Man, that's huge. So that's great insight, especially from your point of view on both sides of the fence. So you say that, like, what would then be your one piece of advice if you're starting out in the music industry? And the follow-up to that, since you did do, you know, the festivals, and, you know, did you do any actual touring? Were you able to go to? Okay, so what would you say is probably like something that you wish you would have known before you did that?
Well, one thing I definitely would have done is set up an LLC for, for my artist career. The LLC is like the cheapest thing you can do for your music business to limit your personal liability and to save on taxes. I was running this all as a unincorporated DBA through me as a sole proprietor. And I was making decent money through touring. I was mostly touring the college scene, which is guaranteed fees every night, which is great, and getting to see a lot of the country, which is also awesome. But those are all W-9s, and the IRS wants a big chunk of that at the end of the year. So if that was something that was run through an LLC, now you can better track business expenses and mileage and all that other stuff. And then it limits your personal liability. If you enter a contract, you can enter the contract in the name of the LLC, and you're providing the services of that artist. So you're not getting sued personally, and they're not coming after your car and your house. They're coming after the assets of that LLC.
That's huge. That's the first thing I tell most artists. If you're going to take this serious, then do the serious thing and make an LLC. And this isn't anything to do with status as I have a business. It has to do with tax codes, marketing, things that like you're going to want to do that. Like I tell a lot of artists, you know, taking a video, going down to the mall and buying a bunch of stuff and then posting that video on YouTube is marketing. You can now write off a majority of that stuff as advertising and marketing for your company. And that's a tax write-off. That's huge. And that's what these big artists are doing that you can do as an independent artist and leverage it to save money or at least, you know, make a little bit of money on the back end. Because, you know, it's hard being an independent starving artist, you know, working a part-time job. I can't even imagine, you know, having to deal with the taxes at the end of the year too, from your, you know, hobby or passion or love or whatever it might be as well.
Yeah, for sure. That was something that every year, the better I did, it always seemed like the bigger of a gut punch it was. You know, oh, geez, I didn't. Okay, of course I didn't pay the estimated quarterly taxes because I wasn't thinking about that. But also, it helps. It really helps keep things separate. You know, if you had an LLC, then you would set up a business bank account, and all that money would go in there. And you know exactly what's coming in. It wouldn't go into your personal, and it wouldn't get all mixed and mingled, and you would actually know what your finances are.
Overall, that's important as just a business owner and entrepreneur too, is like the separation. When I tell artists that you need to work on brand separation, right? Like you as a person versus you as a brand and an artist, that LLC kind of helps to create those silos for you to work into so that there is no crossover of money or liability. Above all things, like you were saying, you want to make sure that artists aren't getting into this liability trap where it's a gray area whether you were actually acting as your brand or your business or if you were as your person. So having those clear lines really helps save you in the back end. What do you think of that? Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. So there's this, you are treated like an LLC so long as you respect the separateness of the business and yourself personally. If you treat your LLC and its bank account like your personal bank account, and you are, you know, paying your rent, and you are like going to the mall, and if it's not a marketing thing, you're going to the mall and like getting like a pretzel or something like that, you know, and you're just like, you know, going to Victoria's Secret and stuff like that. That is personal expenses.
Yeah.
And you could limit, even though you have filed this with the Secretary of State, you can lose your limited liability protections because you are refusing to accept the separateness. In other words, if somebody sues you and they sue the LLC, they're going after that. And that's separate from you personally because it's a whole different entity. But if you treat them as the same, then you shouldn't get to pick and choose what somebody else can do to you.
Right.
So you get those protections as long as you keep them nice and separate. And you can always pay yourself, you know, as the owner of your LLC, but do it as like a transfer, as a withdrawal, or as like a, you know, a bonus to you as like the employee of your business, the owner of your business. Don't just use that money for personal, you know, spending.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, we even got into a little accounting there. Look at that. All kinds of good information. No, but man, this has really been awesome. I wanted to bring up too, when you were talking about sync licensing, and I know we're kind of running out of time, but the big thing with sync licensing for me was, did you see what United Masters re-signing with NFL for exclusives on there? Yeah, that's great. See, that's a huge piece where you have someone like United Masters who's saying, we got all these indie artists. let's get them an opportunity with the NFL. And there's even I forgot who it was, but got on, was it Madden or 2K? I don't know, but there's a lot of indie artists you're seeing on those soundtracks and just the catalogs on those games now.
And those are huge, and especially in the video game industry, that's a huge industry that is 10x what the global music industry revenue is. They can pay for some pretty nice licensing fees. So the fact that that's going to more independent artists is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, great, man. That's I'm so happy that you were able to we were able to link up, and like I said, it really comes down to just, hey, find somebody who's professional, looks like they know what they're doing, get in their DMs. And that's really, we started talking about the whole thing with you did a post on it. So what about any updates?
There have been some updates, and I haven't made an update video.
Okay.
That was the rapper Plies sued Megan Thee Stallion, Glorilla, their label, for copyright infringement of his song and this beat. And if you listen to it, it sounds very similar. It's in the same key, it's the same pitches and everything. But what's interesting is that the producer of the Megan Thee Stallion track has now come out and said, I'm very confused by this lawsuit, because we actually took this sample from this song, a whole different song, from this song that came out 2 years before that rapper. And we have properly cleared it, and we got the publishing. And if you listen to that song, it's pitched, it's higher. It's octave higher, and like the tone is a different tone, but it's the same do. It sounds very similar. So now that raises the question, they in good faith licensed that song, and they have more or less done what they're supposed to do in getting things cleared. Now it opens the question of whether or not Plies, who has filed that lawsuit, owns it, or if he copied it from somebody else. So that case was already kind of wonky and kind of weak, but that really hurts it. And I was at first really sympathetic to his lawyers trying to reach a deal with Universal Music Group without filing a lawsuit. To try to get things worked out. And I was a little confused, but not surprised that they weren't able to get something worked out short of litigation, because that's kind of the game that a lot of majors play. But now knowing that they were already cleared with somebody else and they believed that they had all the rights, I can see why they're like, oh, we're not going to be shaken down. We'll just see you in court and see what the judge wants to do about this.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I plan on doing a video. Maybe we can do one in the future talking about interpolation versus sampling and how those, because I think there's a very common misconception from artists on like what interpolation is, or even if what the hell they don't even know how it works. And then that versus like pure sampling, like you've just taken this and now you're trying to pitch it up or pitch it down, change it just in some way. But I think that's something that probably needs to be put out a little bit more to artists as well, because it's going to become a problem.
For sure.
But hey, Ryan, I appreciate it. You want to go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you and reach out to you and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So the easiest place to find me is on Instagram. That's at ryanschmidt.esq. You can find out a whole bunch of legal advice there. I have an Ask a Music Lawyer Anything series where you can drop your legal questions and I will answer them. And then if you actually want to work with me, there's a link in my bio to how you can get on my calendar. You can shoot me an email.
Sounds great. Well, appreciate it, man.
Feeling like Khaled with the major keys. Steady feeling like I'm the one jet lead. Thoughts too heavy, so it's loud with the leaf. Time is really money, so I keep it real brief. Time waits for no man, fuck sleep. City too small, so I took it overseas. On God, nigga, man, free my G. Know the weight on your shoulders, dumb heavy. When they at a time, yeah, they haters gonna see. Lay your head high, you still pushing P. Know you felt rainy days, it's okay. Live the